illegal migration? Well, it turns out, interestingly, folks, the government is facilitating it. The government has been facilitating massive human trafficking being run through the border. And I'm not just saying that. A recent grand jury in Florida determined this. This includes serious allegations, in their own words, in fact, of the government aiding and abetting child trafficking. Let me explain. On March 30th, the Florida Attorney General, Ashley Moody, she published on her official website this: grand jury releases shocking report. She points to a 142-page document from the Supreme Court of Florida, and it details the terrible reality of these unaccompanied minors, these unaccompanied children we always hear about, you know? It turns out, folks, many of these unaccompanied children we keep hearing about, they're being abused and trafficked. And worse, it turns out the federal government is directly involved, and your tax dollars are what's financing it. The Supreme Court of Florida notes it in 2021, one example of this. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, they lost contact with close to 20,000 unaccompanied alien children. It cites multiple examples of the agency placing children, these unaccompanied minors, in the homes of unknown men with no private bedrooms. Where are the kids staying? They sharing a room with these unknown men? It notes the Department of Health and Human Services and the Justice Department. It says they received thousands of allegations of sexual abuse. It includes cases of children being forced into prostitution. The report details how, despite these horrifying facts, the Office of Refugee Resettlement actually discourages any checks on the addresses where the children are being sent. But they find that in Jacksonville, Florida, where they actually looked into it, some of these addresses where these children are being sent to these unknown men, they include strip clubs. They include open fields. They include, this is an exact quote, they include empty lots surrounded by stacked shipping containers. And in many cases, the people receiving these kids, they have disturbing profiles. This report from the Supreme Court in Florida details how the government does not require criminal background checks on the men they're handing these kids to. It says in some cases they were former prisoners, including with history of child abuse. The Florida grand jury also found a disturbing pattern with these sponsors applying to receive multiple trafficked children. One example. One address in Texas had 44 of these children in a single residence. It was common for sponsors to receive more than 4 of the kids. The list of disturbing findings goes on and on. And what's interesting now, similar claims are being now brought to Congress. Tarlead Rodas, a Department of Health and Human Services whistleblower, actually stepped forward. She recently testified before the House Judiciary Committee, and she said the U.S. government is, the quote she says in her own words, the middleman in a multi-billion-dollar migrant trafficking operation. Watch this.
My goal is to inspire action to safeguard the lives of migrant children, including the staggering 85,000 that are missing. Today, children will work overnight shifts at slaughterhouses, factories, restaurants to pay their debts to smugglers and traffickers. Today, children will be sold for sex. And I have to confess, I knew nothing about their suffering until 2021 when I volunteered to help the Biden administration with the crisis at the southern border. I thought I was going to help place children in loving homes. Instead, I discovered that children are being trafficked through a sophisticated network that begins with recruiting in home country, smuggling to the U.S. border, and ends when ORR delivers a child to a sponsor. Some sponsors are criminals and traffickers and members of transnational criminal organizations. Some sponsors view children as commodities and assets to be used for earning income. This is why we are witnessing an explosion of labor trafficking. Now, whether it's intentional or not, it could be argued that the United States government has become the middleman in a large-scale, multi-billion-dollar child trafficking operation that is run by bad actors seeking to profit off of the lives of children. Realizing that we were not offering the children the American dream, but instead putting them in modern-day slavery with wicked overlords was a terrible revelation.
So folks, is the federal government really facilitating child trafficking? Is that an exaggeration? Well, the recent grand jury in Florida seems to think this is very much what's happening. There are now actually similar calls for investigations into this. I can tell you during my own on-the-ground investigations, actually on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border, I came to similar findings. Folks, put simply, we've been lied to about the real nature of this so-called border crisis. This is not some organic problem. This is a government-run operation. I'm not just saying that either. These operations are being run by the United Nations International Organization for Migration, or IOM. They operate by facilitating the trafficking of these individuals all through Latin America into the United States alongside various NGOs. At the head of the operation are various U.S. government branches, with most of the money coming from the U.S. State Department. Watch this. The question of where the money is coming from is answered on the IOM website. The most commonly named donor is the United States government, and it lists several sub-branches of the U.S. Agency for International Development and the U.S. State Department. The UN organization appears to work directly with the State Department. It says that its refugee resettlement program, which runs on donations from the State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, provides extensive support to the U.S. government in carrying out its U.S. refugee admissions program. Among its listed services are medical, training, processing of cases, and transportation. It says the IOM branch in New York works as a liaison between the IOM and the U.S. State Department. And its website also solves some of the mystery where the migrants are getting their money. Under the Refugee Travel Loans tab of its website, it states, all refugees arriving in the United States are offered interest-free travel loans by IOM. And it says IOM arranges for refugee travel using funds furnished by the Department of State. It notes that refugees need to repay these debts within 46 months after arriving in the United States, and it passes this responsibility to NGOs, including the Church World Service, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the International Rescue Committee, and others. American taxpayers are financing the mass migration into the United States, including for operation costs and for direct payments to the migrants. The money is going through various NGOs, which are involved in resettling refugees. And the United Nations, meanwhile, is facilitating the migration into the U.S. under the guidance of the State Department. Folks, are you getting that? This quote-unquote border crisis is being aided by the government. The border crisis includes child sex trafficking and child slavery. There are many government branches involved in that, including the transportation and the resettlement. There are policies in place that prevent transparency, and also policies that would normally protect women and children being cast to the wayside. And to top it all off, your tax dollars are paying for it. Well, folks, that's all for tonight. Thank you.